He took his sick daughter to the clinic and froze when he saw the nurse was his long-lost love. He built a healthcare empire. She walked away from his world without looking back. Years later, their lives collide again. This time, not as lovers, but as strangers bound by a child and a past too heavy to ignore. When his daughter falls ill, and the only person who can save her is the woman he once let go, Adrian Miles must face the silence he left behind. But what if the true cure isn't medicine, but a single teacup steeped in memory? Stay until the end, because sometimes the third cup of tea holds more than warmth. It holds the truth before we begin the story. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The SUV came to a smooth halt in front of Willow Ridge Community Health Center, its sleek black surface clouded by the early morning fog tucked between a forgotten bookstore and a dry cleaner. With a flickering sign, the clinic barely stood out from the quiet stretch of Chicago's Lincoln Square. But to 7-year-old Maya Miles, wrapped in a blanket in the back seat, it was exactly where she wanted to be. Adrian Miles, CEO of one of the country's largest private healthcare corporations, checked his rearview mirror. Maya's eyes were closed, her forehead flushed, and her small hands clutched a weathered stuffed penguin. She had barely slept. Fever had taken hold sometime after midnight, and now each breath she took was heavier than the last. She had whispered it through chattering teeth the night before, half asleep in his arms. Not the big hospital, Dad. It's cold there. I just want a small place where people smile. He hadn't understood why it hit him the way it did. Adrian was a man of systems and reason, a strategist at heart, but her voice, trembling and small, had cut through all of that. He hadn't argued. He had simply searched, and that's how he'd found Willow Ridge, a tiny clinic with outdated signage and peeling paint, barely a dot on the city map. He stepped out and opened the back door, gathering Maya into his arms gently. Her body sagged against him, exhausted. As he pushed open the clinic's entrance, a bell chimed above the door. Not a recorded tone, not a digital ping, but an actual bell. Old and real. Inside, the world shifted. No bright white walls, no automated kiosks, no overhead voice calling numbers. Just soft jazz humming from a speaker tucked in the corner, the scent of eucalyptus and lemon balm, and warm morning light spilling through lace curtains. Adrian lowered Maya onto one of the wooden chairs in the waiting room, his eyes roaming instinctively, noting the lack of high-end equipment, the mismatched seating, the warmth. And then he saw her. From the end of the hallway, a woman in a white coat stepped out of an exam room. Folder in hand, her hair tied back, her posture poised. It took only a second for recognition to bloom. Slow, painful, undeniable. Ellie Harper. He hadn't said her name aloud in over a decade, but in that moment it rang louder than memory. The woman who had once stood by him when he had nothing to offer except belief. The woman who had vanished without goodbye, without answers. She saw him. For the briefest second, something flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced with professional calm. She gave a small, nearly imperceptible nod, like wind brushing over the surface of a still lake. Adrian nodded back. His breath caught somewhere between regret and disbelief. He said nothing. Ellie walked past him, crouched in front of Maya, and her voice softened into something so natural it felt like a memory. "Hi there, sweetheart. What's your name?" Maya stirred eyes, half-lidded Maya. Well, Maya, Ellie said with a smile that didn't force anything. I'm Ellie. I'm going to be your nurse today, okay? Maya gave the smallest nod. Adrian watched as Ellie rested her hand on Maya's forehead, gentle, careful. She then lifted the little girl. With ease, her arms practiced from years of tending to the fragile. Without a glance back, she carried Maya down the hall and into the exam room. He didn't follow. He sat. In the silence that followed, Adrian's eyes drifted toward a mirror on the opposite wall. His own reflection met him, older, sharper, but undeniably tired. He stared at the man he had become, a father, a decision-maker, a man who had built an empire in the absence of something he never let himself name. 10 minutes passed before the exam room door opened. Ellie emerged, Maya asleep against her shoulder. She'll be fine, Ellie said, her voice calm, her expression unreadable. Just a viral fever. Fluids rest. She'll bounce back. Adrian stood and reached to take Maya. Their hands touched his, brushing her shoulder, and in that single contact, something tightened in his chest. Their eyes met again, but neither looked away this time. Thank you. He said her name. A whisper. Ellie. She didn't reply. Just handed Maya over her hand, lingering for half a second longer than necessary, then turned and walked away. As Adrian turned to leave, Maya stirred faintly. Daddy, do you know the nurse? His breath hitched. Across the hallway, Ellie had paused in her step. He looked down at Maya, brushed her damp hair from her face. Yeah, he whispered. A long time ago. The door closed softly behind them. The bell didn't chime this time. Just silence. A silence that held too many things unsaid. And in the reflection of that still mirror in a modest clinic on a quiet Chicago street, something long dormant began to stir again. If this story has stirred something in, you don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter where memory, love, and loss collide in ways that just might heal what was once broken. The letter had remained untouched for over a decade, sealed in an envelope with no name, no return address, only a quiet weight that Adrian Miles carried in the depths of his desk drawer. But long before it was written, there was once a library corner, a red maple tree, and a pair of mismatched notebooks that told the story of how it all began. It started their sophomore year at Northwestern. Adrian, a business student groomed for legacy, walked with the confident stride of someone raised to fill a seat at the head of the table. Ellie Harper, by contrast, moved through campus with focused grace, a nursing student on full scholarship. Her life shaped by responsibility and ambition born of loss. They met not in a lecture hall or at a campus mixer, but in silence when Adrian dropped a thick book on psychosomatic medicine and Ellie bent down to hand it back to him. Their connection didn't come from instant sparks, but from questions. He admired her clarity. She challenged his assumptions. Study sessions turned into late-night debates. Debates into shared coffees under the wide canopy of a maple tree that turned a brilliant red every October. That tree became theirs, where they marked birthdays, whispered secrets, and mapped futures that stretched toward both ambition and affection. They were opposites, but not contradictions. His world was structured by power and prestige, hers by empathy and grit. And still, they met in the middle at first. But as graduation drew closer, shadows lengthened. Ellie earned a full scholarship to Edinburgh for an intensive trauma care program. Adrian's father heard the news before Adrian did. 2 weeks later, Ellie was summoned to dinner by Adrian's parents. He never learned what was said in that conversation. Only that afterward, Ellie changed. She smiled, less spoke, in shorter sentences. And though she never said it aloud, Adrian saw her preparing to leave long before her flight. On their last night together, he asked her if she'd wait for him. She looked at him for a long time, her hand resting just above his heart. Will you ever choose something without asking what it costs? He didn't answer. Couldn't. The next day she was gone. In their library corner, tucked between the worn arm of a leather chair and a philosophy textbook, she had left a notebook. On the first page, I'm not leaving you. I'm letting go before the world forces me to. There were no explanations, just a quiet grief that filled every line. Adrian had never written back. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to speak the kind of truth that didn't come with defense or strategy. Years passed. He rose quickly in the corporate world, took over acquisitions, expanded clinics, married briefly, lost the marriage, gained custody of Maya, built a life that looked complete from the outside, but never felt quite whole inside. And then there she was, Ellie, in that small clinic. No anger in her eyes, no bitterness, just the steadiness of someone who had made peace with her path and had no space left for blame. That night, after Maya had fallen asleep and the house had gone still, Adrian found the old notebook. Her handwriting, though faded, was still legible. As he traced the words with his fingers, a thought returned sharp and unforgiving. She hadn't left because she stopped loving him. She had left because he wouldn't fight for a life outside the one already chosen for him. Now, all these years later, he wondered, had the world forced them apart? Or had he simply let it? Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the silence was full of what once was. And in the quiet crackle of memory, Adrian realized something he hadn't dared admit before. He hadn't lost Ellie because she walked away. He lost her because he stayed exactly where they told him to stand. The fever spiked sometime after midnight. Adrian had been dozing upright in the armchair beside Maya's bed, one hand resting on the quilt that covered her small body. When she stirred, it was with a sound that sent cold panic down his spine. A dry, rasping cough, followed by a shallow gasp. Her skin, already warm earlier in the day, now felt like fire. She clutched her chest with one hand, her breath coming in tight, uneven bursts. "Daddy," she whispered, barely audible. "It hurts to breathe." Adrian's instinct snapped awake. He checked her temperature. 103.7. The number hit him harder than he expected. He reached for his phone, dialing the emergency line, but the response came in a flat voice. Estimated wait. Time, 20 minutes too long. Every second stretched into unbearable weight. He stared down at Maya, her eyes fluttering open, full of fear. And in that moment, everything stripped away. Title control logic. He needed help. Not protocol. Not perfection. Just help. His fingers moved before thought could stop them. He scrolled through his recent call log, paused on the only name that made sense in the haze of urgency. Ellie. It rang once, then a voice steady, clear Adrian. His words spilled out, fractured. "It's Maya. She can't breathe. I don't know what to do. Please, stay calm," she said instantly. "Sit her upright. Tilt her slightly forward. Pat her back gently. I'm on my way. What's the address?" He told her, barely forming the numbers, and she replied, "Keep her awake. I'll be there in 10. True to her word. 8 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Adrian opened it with trembling hands. Ellie stood in the threshold, wearing a gray sweater, her hair hastily pulled back, a medical bag at her side. Her eyes scanned his face, then moved past him. "Where is she?" she asked, already moving. "Bedroom left." She entered like a current of purpose, not rushed, but unwavering. In Maya's room, she took in everything in seconds. She pulled on gloves, turned on the bedside lamp, and checked the girl's airway. Her breathing, her pulse. Her movements were confident, practiced. Adrian hovered helplessly by the door. "Laryngospasm," she murmured. "Not uncommon with viral infections. I've got a bronchodilator here." She turned to him. "Hold her upright. She needs to feel someone close." He moved quickly, kneeling beside the bed, cradling Maya against his chest. She opened her eyes, unfocused, but when they landed on Ellie, they brightened just a little. "I missed you," Maya whispered hoarsely. Ellie smiled gently, lifting the inhaler. "I missed you too, kiddo. Let's blow some bubbles together." "Okay." She administered the medicine slowly, rhythmically. Between puffs, she whispered encouragements, her voice as soft as it was years ago. In that library corner, Adrian watched, heart swelling with something he didn't quite recognize. Gratitude, awe. Maybe even something deeper. Minutes passed. Maya's breathing settled. The room softened. Ellie adjusted the blanket around. The girl smoothed her damp hair, then peeled off her gloves. "She's okay now," she said, her voice quiet. "She's through it." Adrian exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour, but something inside him still trembled. He followed her into the hallway as she packed her bag. "How did you get here so fast?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, calm. "I've always been nearby. You just never called." Then she opened the door and disappeared into the night. He stood there long after she was gone. The air was still heavy with things unsaid, and in that silence, Adrian Miles realized how many years had passed with him reaching for the wrong kinds of help, while the only person who had ever really shown up had quietly stayed within reach. The following morning, Adrian sat alone in his office on the 28th floor of the Miles Medical Tower. The skyline stretched endlessly outside the glass walls, a symbol of everything he'd built, Deal's influence power. But this morning, none of it could pull his focus away from one simple email. He had read it 3 times already, but still couldn't stop his hand from clicking it open once more. Subject line: "Declined offer, Ellie Harper." It had been sent by his recruitment team the week prior. They had offered her a senior nursing position at Providence General, one of the flagship hospitals in the Miles health system. 6-figure salary, full benefits leadership track, and a fully paid scholarship toward a nurse practitioner certification. Her response had been short: "Thank you for the offer. I believe in a different kind of healing, where patients are called by name, not by case number. I hope you find your way back to that someday." No pleasantries, no hesitation, just the clarity of someone who had already made peace with her decision. Adrian leaned back in his chair, fingers laced at the back of his neck, staring at the ceiling. In his world, people didn't walk away from opportunity, especially not ones wrapped in prestige. But Ellie had, without blinking. He found himself standing outside Willow Ridge later that afternoon. The sky had turned a soft gray, and a faint breeze stirred the leaves on the sidewalk. He didn't have an appointment. He didn't even have an excuse, but he walked in anyway. past the familiar bell, past the front desk, and down the hall where he knew she would be. Ellie was there, wiping down the exam table with a faded cloth. Her movements were unhurried, careful, as if every surface deserved her full attention. She hadn't seen him yet. He stood silently watching her, absorbing something he had never paid enough attention to before, how gently she moved in the world. She looked up, startled, but composed. "You forgot something," she asked. He hesitated. "Not exactly. I saw your response to Providence." She nodded slowly, folding the cloth into a neat square. "I figured you might. You could be anywhere." He said, "Why here? Why a clinic with no budget and barely a functioning X-ray machine?" Ellie turned toward the sink, washed her hands in silence, dried them, then leaned back against the counter. "Do you remember my mom?" she asked softly. Adrian nodded. He remembered the stories. The single mother who worked 2 jobs, who died in the ER after hours of being left unattended, passed from nurse to nurse, anonymous until the very end. She died at 6:17 a.m. in a big hospital. Ellie continued. No one remembered her name. No one looked her in the eyes. I got there 10 minutes too late. And the worst part, I don't even think she noticed. She was too used to being invisible. Adrian didn't speak. He felt the words land in his chest, like slow drops of rain. "I didn't walk away from your world," she said. "I walked toward something that still believes people are worth more than the sum of their insurance plan and lab results." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't plead. It simply told the truth. "I thought you gave up," Adrian said finally, his tone low. Ellie gave a soft, breathless laugh, more sadness than amusement. "I didn't give up. I just didn't go the way they wanted me to." She held up the cloth she had used, worn at the edges, faded from years of washing. "It was my mom's," she said. "She always told me, don't clean something just to get it over with. Do it like it matters, even if no one sees it." Adrian looked at her, really looked, and something inside him gave way, not to regret, but to clarity. All his life, he had believed in outcomes, in proof, in metrics. But now, standing in the soft light of a clinic, most people never noticed. He saw what belief looked like when it didn't need to be broadcast. He had spent his life building monuments. Ellie had built presence, and maybe, just maybe presence, was the only thing that could ever heal what ambition had left behind. It was still dark when Adrian pulled up to the curb outside Willow Ridge. The clinic wouldn't open for hours, and the street was mostly empty, save for the soft hum of distant traffic and the flicker of street lamps reflecting off the wet pavement. He stepped out of the car, dressed in jeans and a white shirt. Not the usual, polished suit, but something plain, something unguarded. In his hand was a canvas bag, heavy with cleaning supplies, and something else, a small pouch of ginger tea, the kind Ellie always brewed after long shifts. She had pressed the clinic's spare key into his palm the night she saved Maya. No words, just a look. He hadn't known what it meant at the time. But this morning, he did. Adrian unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The soft gray of dawn filtered through the lace curtains. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't need to. Everything was quiet, gentle waiting. He set the bag on the counter and pulled out gloves, cloths, a mop, and the tea. No fanfare, no intention to be seen. Just an unspoken truth. Something needed tending. Not just the space, but something within himself. He started with the waiting area, picking up scattered papers, organizing magazines, straightening chairs that had long since stopped matching. Then he moved to the corners, the places people rarely noticed. His hands used to handling contracts and conference microphones grew red from scrubbing. His shirt clung to his back as sweat bloomed across it, slow and persistent. But he didn't stop. Every motion became a kind of penance. Every swipe of the mop was an unspoken sentence. He paused once to boil water in the small electric kettle behind the front desk. The scent of ginger and honey soon drifted into the air, wrapping around the space like memory. He poured it into Ellie's old teacup, the one with the chip at the handle and the faint stain she could never scrub out, and placed it gently on her desk beside the stethoscope she'd left the night before. He didn't write a note. No name, no flourish. Just one line on a small scrap of paper. Thank you for being there. And then he returned to the waiting room to finish the chairs. He didn't hear her come in. Ellie stepped through the back entrance just after sunrise. Sandwich in hand, her shoulders rolled slightly forward from the weight of a long night's work. She paused when she saw the light, the scent, the gleaming floors. She didn't speak. Instead, she walked slowly down the hallway, following the sound of quiet effort. Through the crack in the door, she saw him, Adrian, shirt-damp sleeves, rolled bending over each armrest, wiping them with a care that didn't belong to someone just passing time. He didn't know she was there. She watched him for a long moment, silent. Then without a word, she turned back toward the front desk, lifted the teacup to her lips, and took a sip. That evening, Maya sat cross-legged on the living room rug, sketching with her favorite set of colored pencils. She held up the drawing to Adrian proudly. It showed the clinic waiting room, bright and welcoming. Ellie stood behind the desk with her cup of tea, smiling. In the background was Adrian, mop in hand, hair tousled shirt, wrinkled, quietly, grinning. You didn't say, sorry, Maya said, tilting her head at him. But I think your hands already did. Adrian stared at the picture, and for the first time in years, he didn't need to explain himself, because somehow, through sweat silence and a chipped teacup, he had begun to speak a language Ellie had understood all along. It was Sunday afternoon, when Maya handed Ellie a card she had made herself. She had folded it carefully and painted it in watercolors, her little fingers leaving smudges along the edges. On the front, there were 3 teacups each with a rising curl of steam shaped like a heart. Inside in slanted handwriting, it read, "The first cup is for my mom. The second is for my dad. The third is for the one who stayed. You're that person?" Ellie read the words slowly, her hands still. Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. She looked at Maya, who stood beside her, proud but quiet, like she knew this card carried more than a child's art. It carried understanding. "I didn't know why my mom always made 3 cups of tea," Maya said softly. "Now I do." Ellie couldn't speak. Not right away. She simply bent down and pulled the girl into her arms. Some hugs aren't taught, they're remembered. That night, long after the dishes were done and the apartment had fallen into a stillness only evening could bring, Ellie stood in her kitchen with 3 porcelain cups lined on the counter. She hadn't done this in years, not since her mother had passed, not since Adrian had left, not since she chose to walk away from a life that had once asked her to shrink. She brewed ginger tea slowly, letting the scent rise through the room, like breath returning to a body long still. She placed the first cup in front of her mother's photo, set neatly beside a small candle. The second she left across from her at the place where no one sat. And the third she cupped in her own hands, warming her fingers. She looked at the middle cup for a long time. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Not loud. Not rushed. As though someone were knocking not just on her door, but on something older. Something quiet inside her. When she opened it, Adrian stood there. He wore no tie, no jacket, just a plain shirt. Sleeves pushed up, eyes open. Not the guarded man who used to hold power like a shield, but someone else. Someone who had finally learned to arrive without a script. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside. "Come in," she said, voice low. Not invitation, not absolution, just space. Adrian walked into the small apartment. The scent of ginger was still in the air. His eyes landed on the table. The 3 cups. Ellie nodded to the middle one. "That one's for Maya." He looked at the third. She didn't explain it. Instead, she placed her hand gently on the rim, then let go. Adrian pulled out the chair and sat down. He didn't touch the tea. He didn't rush. He simply looked at her and the room around them, taking it in with the kind of reverence that only comes when someone knows they're being given a second chance. "I used to think time would fix things," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it doesn't. People do if they choose to come back." Ellie gave a soft smile. Not forgiveness, not yet, but peace. The kind that says, we don't need to be who we were in order to begin again. A shuffle echoed from the hallway. Maya emerged hair-tousled, hugging her fox plush. "I smell tea," she mumbled. "Do I get some too?" "Yes," they both said at once. She climbed into the middle seat, nestled between them. Ellie poured the last cup, placing it gently in front of the child, who had unknowingly been the bridge between past and present. Maya smiled sleepily. Now it's just right, and no one needed to say another word, because sometimes presence is enough. The next Monday morning at Willow Ridge began like any other, soft light pouring through the lace curtains, the scent of eucalyptus still clinging to the air, but something small had changed. On the reception counter alongside the usual teapot sat 3 cups instead of 2. One for the nurse on shift, one for the occasional patient who stayed a little longer, and the third clean empty waiting. When a curious volunteer asked Ellie about it, she smiled gently, touching the rim of the untouched cup. "It's for the one who finds their way back." No one questioned her after that. Adrian had started showing up on Saturdays, not dressed in his tailored suits or holding a phone like an extension of his hand, but in old jeans, sleeves rolled hands open. He didn't come with announcements or declarations. He came with gloves and willingness. He swept. He stocked shelves. He fixed the jammed filing cabinet that had annoyed Ellie for months. He never asked to be seen. He simply returned, and slowly, something began to rebuild between them. Not through grand gestures, but through the simple consistency of care. They didn't talk much about the past. There were no long apologies, no emotional showdowns. Instead, the silence between them softened. They laughed more easily, shared tea during lunch breaks. Adrian learned how Ellie liked her post-shift coffee. 2 sugars, no milk. Ellie learned that Adrian still didn't know how to fold clinic gowns properly and teased him mercilessly for it. Maya thrived in the quiet joy that now filled the spaces between them. Her drawings multiplied. One taped beside Ellie's desk showed the 3 of them standing under a maple tree, one with red leaves, not unlike the one from years ago on campus. In the picture, they were smiling, not perfectly, not posed, just together. One Saturday, as they closed up for the day, Ellie stood at the front counter, rinsing the last teacup. Adrian leaned beside her, watching the way her hands moved. "I used to think healing was about solving problems," he said quietly. "Fixing what's broken." Ellie looked over at him. "And now, I think it's about staying. Even when it's messy, especially when it's quiet." She handed him a towel. He dried the cup without another word. That evening, Maya was curled up in a blanket on the couch, sketching once again. She held up her latest drawing to Adrian, who had just returned from a supply run. In it, Willow Ridge was drawn brighter than usual. Outside, the sky was filled with stars. At the window, 3 cups of tea sat steam rising in soft curls. "I drew it for Ellie," she said, yawning. "She says, tea helps people feel seen." Adrian looked at the drawing, then at his daughter. "Do you think she sees us?" Maya shrugged in that wise, quiet way children sometimes do. "She saw us even when we didn't." Later that night, Adrian stood at his kitchen window, tea in hand. No emails, no meetings, waiting. Just a moment, a breath. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man running from regret or toward redemption. He simply felt present, and presence he now understood was the most honest thing he could ever offer. Somewhere across the city, Ellie was rinsing 3 cups, her hands slow steady. The 3rd cup sat quiet and full. For the one who came back, for the one who stayed, and for the one they were all still becoming together. Final reflection: the story of Adrian Miles and Ellie Harper. Adrian Miles built his life on achievement, one deal at a time, one hospital wing at a time, always aiming upward. As the CEO of a healthcare empire, he was known for his precision power and unwavering focus. But what he didn't realize until much later was that somewhere along the way, in the chase for legacy and approval, he had lost sight of the most human things: presence, warmth, and the quiet strength of staying. Ellie Harper, by contrast, chose a different path. After walking away from the privilege that came with Adrian's world, she never looked back. Not because she was bitter, but because she believed in a kind of care that couldn't be measured in charts or dictated by hierarchy. Her work at Willow Ridge wasn't about prestige. It was about people. The ones whose names mattered. The ones whose hands needed holding. The ones the world so often overlooked. Their love was once young, full of promise, but torn apart by the weight of expectation. Years later, it was a sick child and a quiet knock on the door that brought them face to face again. Not as the people they used to be, but as the people they had grown into. Through small moments, shared tea, mended chairs, and a child's drawing, they began to rebuild something deeper than romance trust. Adrian didn't apologize with flowers or speeches. He showed up with gloves and a mop. He didn't ask to be forgiven. He worked to be present. And Ellie, without forcing herself to forget, allowed space for something new to bloom. Not because time had healed the old wounds, but because 2 people had chosen to stop running and start showing up. The heart of this story isn't just about second chances in love. It's about the bravery of becoming honest. The kind of honesty that isn't loud, but quiet and consistent. It's about realizing that success without connection is just noise, And sometimes the deepest repair happens not in a dramatic apology, but in the steady act of returning. So, what can we take from Adrian and Ellie's journey? That it's never too late to come back, not just to a person, but to a version of yourself that you left behind. That the smallest gestures, sweeping a floor, pouring tea, remembering a name, can carry the deepest meaning. And that presence, more than perfection, is what binds us to each other. In a world moving too fast, perhaps the most radical thing we can do is slow down long enough to notice who we've become and who we still have the chance to be. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever let someone go because you didn't know how to stay? Or have you ever been the one who stayed when everyone else left? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to come back or stay. And if this story touched your heart, helped you reflect, or made you pause for even a moment, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us continue to bring you more soulful, meaningful stories like this one. Let's keep reminding each other what really matters, one story at a time.